Beep, 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 beep. Live from Wellston, Georgia, it's another episode of the Wartown Times. Be sure to stay up to date by joining the Wartown Times Facebook group under Facebook.
5. Let's discuss wartown law enforcement. The police. What a wonderful discussion for us to now move towards, given what we've learned so far. As clearly where the rubber of statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances meet the road of we the people of Wartown is in the interactions most of us have with men and women behind the badge. Police are perhaps an essential component to a republic, make no mistake. A free people of Wartown surely have a vested interest in ensuring that our rights are protected and not infringed upon. We logically have no problem with a force of peace officers, keeping the peace. And we the people of Wartown should make the distinction in our minds and in our discussions between peace officers and law enforcement officers, because there is a difference. If there were not a distinction between a peace officer and a law enforcement officer, there would not be a need for two separate verbiages to refer to an officer of the police force. Therefore, it is incumbent upon we the people to understand for ourselves what those distinctions may be, to interact and cooperate with the Wartown Police Force and its officers to all our mutually beneficial goals, which we all should agree is the keeping of the peace. The distinction should not be known by just the people of Wartown, but the individual men and women who wear a badge within the community as well. The officers we employ to keep the peace, which is why they are invited to participate in this friendly neighborhood manifesto as well. This issue is a prime example of why words and how they are used matter. First, let's roll the term peace officer around in our minds and see how that feels. Feels good, right? An officer of peace, a peacekeeping officer. Nothing to do around town but make sure everything is at peace. The term feels good, doesn't it? Makes you eager to wave at an officer like that, or speak to an officer like that, or look up to an officer like that, and maybe want to be that when you grow up. The idea of a peace officer certainly isn't going to drum up tons of generational trauma that makes you cringe to think your hard-earned tax dollars are going to support those officers and their families. Absolutely not. A people who feels they are getting the service they are paying for from a firm have no qualms with supporting, with a portion, their function. A firm that is delivering above and beyond the purpose for which it was hired to execute its duties will find its employers rather satisfied. This means that the responsibility of the employer, and that would be you and the people of Wartown, is to make clear what it is you expect from your peace officers. Now, let's tackle the term law enforcement officer. How does that term feel to you? Bit much, bit forced, bit aggressive, bit meddlesome? And it should, naturally. The word force is smack dab in the middle, poking you in your subconscious like a high-beam flashlight shooting through your car window unnecessarily. Typically, after an interaction with a law enforcement officer, one receives a bill of attainder, commonly called a ticket or citation, with the words "violator's copy" at the bottom, prior to any sort of due process of law. This bill of attainder is usually an allegation that a statute, act, code, or ordinance has been violated, and as a result, the state is going to get some of your money, or your life, many times both, over legislation that never ceases, which often is nothing more than fictions of law due to their conflict with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to begin with. As the saying goes, the more you outlaw, the more outlaws you make, which is to say, you create a society of criminals by default, which becomes a feeding frenzy for law enforcement officers who are proactively seeking to kidnap, find, cage, or kill flesh and blood human beings in incidents where there is no victim and no one's property has been compromised. No, rather what we often call law enforcement is in all reality the enforcement of statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances, which again is not law if it is contrary to your previously secured rights. Now, ask yourself how the term law enforcement officer feels to you, and if that is the sort of thing you want to pay for, or work in, for that matter. Now, let us take a moment to simplify these thoughts between peace officer and law enforcement officer. Where can we find common ground from which these two branches must have sprung? Well, clearly it is that no matter how one refers to them, or how they refer to themselves, they have sworn an oath to the Constitution. They have constitutional duties to protect and preserve the Bill of Rights from enemies both foreign and domestic. In this fact, we can dissolve any confusion as to what we are employing the police and for what purpose they are employed, keeping the peace and upholding the law. Neither of these require any officer we the people of Wartown hire to know or enforce any statute, act, code, or ordinance. For a police officer working for wartown taxpayers to keep the peace and uphold the law, the only requirements are a pocket constitution, common sense, and personal discretion. We, the people, need to make it absolutely clear to the good men and women who serve in the police force that we want them to first and foremost, when interacting with the public, to be consistently asking themselves if someone's rights have been violated or if their property has been compromised before engaging in potentially criminal actions they are unaware of themselves. After all, this is literally what they are being paid to do, yet it is abundantly clear that somewhere along the line the job description has been completely skewed. While there are many eager to jump on the bandwagon of bashing the men and women who wear a badge due to the countless injustices that occur from bad actors within police forces across the country, we would ask them first if they've done their part to make the simple duties clearly and specifically voiced to local police. Have the detractors and defamers of all things police done their own duty as employers to outline to new recruits as well as sitting police chiefs that they want peace officers over law enforcement officers that tend to do their enforcing on some kind of national level rather than an appropriate local level? While there are always some exceptions, we all know that if you, the reader, haven't dusted off your own pocket constitution in quite some time and are ignorant of these common sense philosophies bestowed upon us by previous generations, you certainly haven't made them known to your employees or held them accountable to them. How then can we expect men and women who are joining the wartown police force to know them either, just because they are issued a uniform, badge, and a few gadgets? How can newly hired police officers perform the actual duties we hired them for if we, the people, their employer, do not take our place as the source and power behind all law and make it known to them? Again, we would reference the Holy Bible in that each individual must first pluck out the beam from their own eye before they attempt to remove the speck of dust from another's eye. Having peace officers over law enforcement officers in wartown is indeed common sense for all parties involved. If the points of contact and or action from police officers are reduced to their constitutional limits within the actual law, the risk of harm, trauma, or even death to individuals, as well as the officers themselves, will be dramatically reduced. The burden of taxpayers to supply never-ending resources such as buildings, cruisers, tanks, and other lethal modalities of enforcing statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances will significantly drop, which in turn could mean higher and more beneficial pay for the peace officers doing what we hired them to do. Additionally, the morale and cooperation between the people of Wartown and those wearing a badge would escalate to common and mutual respect that creates an environment free from smacking very much like a nanny state that no American wants. Regardless of if other cities in the state or country choose to run their police force with a mindset that what comes out of the District of Columbia and its paranoid protocols is the standard everywhere, the good people of Wartown can and should do a better job to prove this is not so. We can and should provide each officer with a copy of their own pocket constitution and mandate them to know it and apply it in their daily tasks. We should not be hiring or promoting any officer that has not committed its principles to memory and demonstrates a stern seriousness to the oath they swore to it. Concordantly, it is the duty of the people to be on swift alert and response when any infringements of civil rights and liberties within Wartown occur by men and women wearing a badge upon any individual. This includes demanding such officers to be held accountable, being vocal without ceasing at city council meetings or calls to appropriate branches of government to demand these bad apples be relieved of duty and charged to the fullest extent of the law, if not filing criminal charges against them ourselves when appropriate. It is the duty of the people to be strict upon those behind the badge who would use color of law for revenue generation or personal advantage and bias. Extremely strict. Unwaveringly strict. We must understand that immunity behind the badge is only applicable while the officer is within their duties and oath to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but is non-existent the moment that person steps outside of those parameters into the waters of statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances. In other words, you are not immune to punishment when you violate the rights of another person because you were under the assumption that statutes, acts, codes, and ordinances are actually the law when they are not. This information is not, nor should be considered a burden by any of you, dear readers, police officer or otherwise, unless somehow there is an underlying motivation for those behind a badge to do their job with the intent of revenue generation and or personal advantage with bias, clearly.
Beep, 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 beep. Live from Wellston, Georgia, it's another episode of the Wartown Times. Be sure to stay up to date by joining the Wartown Times Facebook group on the Facebook.